But we've spoken a lot about subnational transport bodies and the importance of the regional voice in developing roads, because they know what they want and they know what their people want. So let's get two perspectives on that. First of all, Director of Communities, Economy and Transport at East Sussex County Council. Please welcome Rupert Clubb.
So the great fear when you do these things is you've actually got quite a tricky exam question to answer. So my unpicking the infrastructure investment strategy, blah-de-blah-de-blah, is one of those ones when I was writing the presentation, I look back and look back again to make sure I'm answering the question. So I suppose the first point to start is the transport investment strategy. And someone collared me earlier on today and said, weren't you the chap that said you quite like it? And actually I do quite like it. I like it so much, and my slides have gone off. It is well written. It starts to put the user, fundamentally put the user at the heart of investment decisions. And that has to be a good thing. You know, we don't care how you get from A to B. You know, as a user, I don't care whether it's on a local road, on a strategic road network, on an MRN. What is important is that I can get from A to B, and I can get from A to B safely. I also really like the way it puts the environment back in to roads investment and transport investment. It's fundamental to creating great places. You know, when we talk about growth, we talk about housing capacity. That focus on environment and well-being is written at large within the transport investment strategy, and I like that. That's a good thing. I think the recognition and the support it gives to a major roads network is welcome. And I also believe that the support that it gives to subnational transport bodies is too very welcome. So in relation to subnational transport bodies, you know, I do believe, and I was thinking when I wrote this slide out, should I put a question mark at the end of the sentence? And I think not. I think subnational transport bodies do have a stewardship role to play. Whether that be in relation to the SRN, the local roads network, or indeed a future MRN. They can speak with one voice on the issues that are affecting a particular region. And you know, that ability to develop a transport strategy in which the legislation says the Secretary of State has to have regard is quite powerful. So I believe STBs need to have a stewardship role in it. You know, there's a question about performance of our roads networks. Perhaps the question mark is, should STBs have a role in that monitoring and performance to help make future investment decisions? And I know this is Highways UK, but it would be a bit remiss, wouldn't it, to not pick up the wider transport interfaces. And here I take a slide from the southeast, which shows not only the trunk road network, but some of the principal A roads. It also shows the rail network, international gateways. There's Heathrow, Gatwick, Southampton on this slide, ports of Dover, ports of Portsmouth, Southampton. So outside of Felixstowe, Southampton handles the largest number of containers in the UK. Major freight operation. So although we're talking about highways and roads investments, actually it cannot be done in isolation. We need to look at the wider transport interlinks, transport relationships, and coming back to that role that STBs can have. You know, where those STBs exist, and I accept that they don't exist all over the country, they do have that oversight on understanding what transport interfaces work well and how we genuinely develop integrated transport arrangements. And I suppose if you just have a look at some of these slides, you see in the top left a picture of Gatwick Airport. I mean, the concept that you can either drive or use a train to a transport interchange is fundamentally important, and I do believe you can't separate out. Now, some of the challenges that we've got coming down the line in relation to housing growth, there's a lot of expectation in the budget on the 22nd of November. There'll be further announcements on housing. It's clear that the government is dead set on building more houses, and transport, be that roads, rail, or other interfaces, are going to be fundamentally important. But there are some existing problems that need sorting. If you look at that bottom left slide, would you believe that is the A27? As part of the strategic road network. You And the key for us is making sure that that SRN is fit for purpose. That road with that tractor on takes 25,000 vehicles a day. So there are some existing challenges that we face. And when you throw in some of the rail pressures we have, those of you that do that delightful commute up through Woking and into Waterloo will recognize South West Trains on that bottom right slide and recognize some of the overcrowding challenges that we face. I mentioned the environment earlier on. Safeguarding our environment has to be at the heart of what we do. If we talk about communities, sustainable communities, place, then it's not just about access to healthcare, access to education, access to transport. It's access to the natural capital and that green space. And if you just look at the southeast here, this just overlays national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty. It hasn't gone into laying sites of special scientific interest and other designations, but you can see that certainly in the southeast, and it will undoubtedly be replicated across the country, there is a lot of environmental constraint. And those of you that have ever tried to build a road in the last 10 years know that communities have very strong views about transport infrastructure, and not just local communities. It's amazing the people that you can draw to protest when you're trying to build major infrastructure. The transport investment strategy starts to right the wrongs, if you like, of past policy documents and starts to place the environment at the heart of it and starts to recognize that the environment and well-being go hand in hand when you're considering transport infrastructure. And I think that's a really, really positive step. I'll put this slide up, clearly for the beekeepers amongst you, but I thought it was just reminds me, when you look at a frame of bees, it's chaos. It's organized chaos, but it's chaos nonetheless. Now, when we get our road system, and I talk about the 25,000 vehicles a day on the A27, that's pretty much chaos, and it feels like a frame of bees. But of course, when it gets too chaotic for bees, when it gets too congested, the queen does a rather cunning thing, makes provision in her existing hive, and clears off to find a new home with half the bees. Now, for the beekeeper, if you miss your swarm, it's slightly frustrating. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we're not bees. We can't just clear off and go somewhere else when the roads are congested. We've got to think about, well, what opportunities can we grasp, can we grapple with to manage the way our transport systems operate, and particularly at times of pressure. And we've got to recognize that we're changing. We're changing the way in which we buy things. The white van is quite prolific in terms of the number of delivery companies that are delivering on behalf of us. We have clean growth strategy. We have major challenges around air quality. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens in relation to Heathrow and the air quality decisions. And the issue there surely isn't about the planes. It has to be about the surface transport implications. But at the same time, we're talking about driverless cars, autonomous vehicles, and the pressure that increasing housing will generate. So the question for me is, have we reached that point of peak car? And I know that's probably feels a bit odd at a highways conference talking about the decline in the car usage. But if you look at the blue line, the blue vertical line that marks the recession, car usage has dropped off. Now, you would think it would have increased after the recession, but you can see that slow decline, not just in the UK, but overseas as well. So the question for me is, what's going to happen next? Will we see an increase in vehicle use? Will it sort of flatline, or will it decline? And I think with some of the challenges we face around air quality and policy decisions that there will be no new sales of diesel and petrol cars by 2040, seems reasonable to make the assumption that car use will decline. So although we talk about investing in our highways and investing in infrastructure, it's quite an interesting sort of conundrum that we face if car use goes down. So those roads I talk about that are sporting 25,000 vehicles a day on, actually over time, will that decrease as people find alternative means of transport, start to use more of the digital infrastructure that is currently being invested in? And let's face it, it wasn't that long ago that it was all about loving your car. And if you talk to my daughter, who's started her secondary school, it is all about the phone. It is all about the technology and the digital. And the way in which we use transport has got to be different in the future. And there's going to come a point, isn't there, where we buy transport. We don't have a car that sits on the driveway for 95% of the time rusting. We procure it, we buy it, we access it in a different way. And undoubtedly, the information age and technology is the way in which we will do so. So a few conclusions for you. I like the transport investment strategy. I think it's well written. I think it ticks a number of my boxes. I like the reference to the major roads network, but it needs to be the complete package. Too often we fall into the trap of thinking about new investment, new infrastructure, new assets, when frankly, in certain parts of the country, the existing asset is deteriorating at a remarkable rate. The backlogs that local authorities face in just maintaining the local road network, in my own area, top about 300 million. If you go to somewhere like Devon, you're getting into the realms of sort of 800 million. So when we talk about new investment, be it on the SRN, major roads network, or indeed the local road network, we need to think of it as the complete package. We need to integrate across the network. We can't just focus on one particular form of transport. You all know that. And I believe the subnational transport bodies have a role to ensure that those interfaces and that integration is managed properly. And it is our opportunity to shape the future as we move into the information age, that people start to buy mobility rather than have their own personal mobility. It's our opportunity to shape the direction in which we go. And finally, I believe that subnational transport bodies can play a key role in shaping that future, working with you, working with partners, working across industry, and most importantly, working with the users. We've got that opportunity to get a great future. Thank you.
Anyway, please welcome, Chair of England's Economic Heartland, one of those transport bodies we've been talking about, Councillor Martin Tett.
Thanks very much, Richard. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Just an observation on Rupert's almost penultimate slide. If my two children are anything to go by, they love their mobile phones, but they also love their cars, I have to tell you. At least by the repeat requests I get to upgrade their cars every couple of years, and I can't afford it either. Just to say, Tricia sort of teased us in terms of some of her comments, and I always love being teased by Tricia. I'm going to tease a little back as well, so I hope you don't mind that, if it's still allowed these days. So, right, slide number 1. What am I going to cover? I'm going to run through quite a bit quite quickly. You're going to get copies of the slides, so there's a lot of material here that you can actually soak in afterwards. So I'm going to move quite fast through this. But I want to cover 3 things. First of all, I want to talk about the takeoff very much in the economic heartland. Many of you may have been at our conference last year. You may well understand this. I'm not going to take that for granted. I'm going to assume maybe a base level of knowledge, but I want to really make sure that everybody's up to the same design speed on what the heartland is and the progress we've made. I want to talk about the acceleration that I think the heartland's got, particularly taking into account both RIS 1 and RIS 2 and the potential they offer. And then I want to come back to the major roads network. And I think some of the key principles that I'd like to see within that consultation when it comes out, which I think can really enable a really step change in the economic growth that this country can enjoy. So those are the 3 things I really want to cover in this session fairly quickly. Firstly, in terms of what is the heartland, started off as a strategic alliance, and that's still the upper tier of this, that I kicked off in partnership with the leader of Oxfordshire and the leader of Northamptonshire about 3.5 years ago. That was rapidly joined by the leaders of the Bedfordshire Unitaries and Milton Keynes. Most recently, we've been joined by Cambridgeshire County Council, then the Mayor's Office of the new Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, and indeed Peterborough itself. And we've now got interest being expressed in joining us from Hertfordshire and Swindon as well. So we're growing. Everybody's seeing this as something really powerful they want to belong to. I guess a question that we've got to answer at some point is, where does that growth stop? You know, there's a real danger it almost becomes too big and too clumsy. But at the moment, scale is good, particularly when you're talking about things like transport. You need to look at it on a sub-regional basis. You need to look at connectivity. both within that particular heartland area, but also between the heartland and the areas around it. So these are not Berlin walls around these subnational transport bodies in my mind. They have to be permeable barriers where you've actually got at least like a fuzzy edge that has connectivity out from them, very much linking in with the rest of the economy in the surrounding area. But we've very much developed that, so it is the strategic alliance at the top level, and that's going to be looking at infrastructure across the whole of the heartland, and then we have a series of boards underneath it, one of which is our transport forum, which is achieving, I think, a lot of traction at the moment, and I'll talk a little bit more about as we go through. The heartland area, why the heartland area? Why not stick to the old European Union, regions, Southeast, Midlands, whatever? But these are bottom up. This is something that we've developed as local authorities, as transport authorities, because we recognize this works for us. This is a collaboration of the willing, not imposed top downwards. That's what makes it really, really significant. It works for us, we trust each other, we get on well as leaderships, and we recognize the economic potential that runs right the way through between Oxford and Cambridge, with Milton Keynes in the middle, but it is not a simple ribbon. It's not literally 3 cities joined by a road or a railway. This is absolutely a sub-region where a lot of the growth in that sub-region actually is not just in those cities themselves, but actually is in the areas surrounding those cities, and actually relies on what we're going to come to call the major roads network coming out from the strategic links to actually link those cities to the transport corridors internationally, like Heathrow, like Luton Airport, like up here into the Midlands, and so on, so that actually you look at the whole of the economic entity, and not just, if you like, in transport terms, just a thin ribbon. It's very much a growth area. We are one of the main net contributors to the National Exchequer. We don't take, we actually donate to the rest of the country, which enables the investment in the North and the Midlands and Scotland and so on that the rest of the country needs. And we have many of the biggest, fastest growing industries in the country. So whether it's the creative sectors like Pinewood, whether it's Motorsport Valley that runs along from Oxfordshire to Milton Keynes, we've got Bosch down in the south of Buckinghamshire. We have some of the collection of some of the biggest, fastest growing industries in the country, the Cambridgeshire Science Parks and so on, rocket engineering in Oxfordshire and in Buckinghamshire. So this is where a lot of the new future for the UK economy is based, and we really need to make sure we invest in it to keep that economy growing. That potential is there. The economic success can come, but it's coming at a price at the moment, because what we're finding is it's not just something for the future, it's not something 5, 10 years out to plan for. This economic growth and housing growth is happening today. Tricia was just saying to me before we came on stage, she was in Buckinghamshire a week ago, and the amount of house building that's going on there is phenomenal. So actually the pressure on our roads is today, the pressure on our infrastructure is today, and we absolutely have to make sure we're investing now to provide the transport links from the main growth points that enable those, if you like, that economic artery and that economic heart to keep beating. So this is absolutely about infrastructure, and it's not just about transport infrastructure. It's about the wider aspects of infrastructure. So, for example, it's about digital connectivity. It's absolutely about the way in which we communicate, not just today, but we'll be communicating in the next 5 and 10 years' time. It's also about the social infrastructure, so for example, the skills infrastructure that enables those economies to grow. It's about housing, but it's not just about becoming a dumping ground for housing for London, which is one thing I worry about with some of the announcements from various politicians. This is about creating real economic communities that are growing based on the economic imperatives of the country as well. So one of the things that has happened relatively recently is the National Infrastructure Commission. I know Andrew Adonis was here briefly this morning to launch this conference. Obviously, he's had to dash off, and I'm seeing him on Friday to get an update on where he's got to with his report. But the NIC report has actually recognized the potential. If I have 2 nuanced comments rather than criticisms of what they're doing, one is they are defining the corridor in a very narrow way. It is a corridor, it's not a sub-region. I would absolutely argue it's about the sub-region. It is not just simply a pipe. It is absolutely about that whole economic ecosystem that exists around not just the major cities, but so much of that growth is taking place in the market towns and in the rural areas where people are running businesses quite often from houses or small plants and so on. So it's absolutely about the sub-region. And we have to make sure it isn't just a narrow focus upon a 3-city block, and it's got to be investment in that wider skills area. And the NIC terms of reference are very narrow in terms of what they can look at. And I'm sure Andrew, if he was given a wider brief, would also be looking at that digital infrastructure, the skills infrastructure, and so on, that's really going to make that successful. In terms of strategic priorities, one of the things we've absolutely got to do is we've got to look at the key things that are actually going to help make the economy grow here. What I put on the slide you can see is, it's not just a city's agenda. We've got to make sure that we've got clarity that actually will enable and leverage in investment from the private sector. The public sector is never going to provide all of the money we need to grow the economy and grow the infrastructure we need. We must leverage in a partnership way what we can actually develop in partnership with the private sector. So many of you in the audience here are key partners and key players in making a success in the sub-region. We've got to look at also, obviously, as I said, the other aspects of infrastructure, and we've got to provide that strategic coordination and leadership. And that's one of the reasons I think the whole subnational transport boards are now going to play such a vital role in the next 5 to 10 years in the way the economy of the country grows, because we can provide that cross-border strategic leadership that is needed, that's wider than local councils, but is narrower than the country as a whole. So that's a commitment we've got there. In terms of providing that leadership, as I said, one of the things that I would argue is it's not just about a dumping ground for housing. It's not even, just dare I say it, about building some big roads. It's about economic leadership. So one of the things that we do within the Heartland area is we include as key players within our board every one of the local enterprise partnerships that government set up to drive economic strategy. And they are producing an integrated economic strategy that runs across the Heartland area. We want to be economically led. We want those LEPs to provide that steer in terms of where the key industries will grow, the key business and service sectors will grow. Therefore, that will drive, if you like, the connectivity that's required, and also, therefore, the housing that's required. Don't put the houses in the wrong place. Build the houses where the economy needs them. I think that's really fundamental. We need a strong commitment also to some of the key deliverables like East-West Rail. We know there was commitment in the last budget to that. We really want to now see delivery on the ground. There's clearance taking place. Some of that initial work's going on. But let's start getting some rails down. Let's start getting some trains running. And we want to get those running as quickly as possible. We want to move beyond the expressway being a concept that people keep talking about. We want to start seeing some real progress on that. I know there's commitment on that as well. And what we want to see, though, is the subnational transport boards being empowered to actually provide that leadership and provide some of that direction that we need and local delivery on the ground. Turning then to RIS 1 and 2 very briefly. What we want to do is make sure that the commitments that are already there in RIS 1 are delivered. And I've put on the slide the infamous Black Cat Roundabout, which I think most people will be aware of. Good to see some commitment there. Let's get that delivered. And of the, I think it was the 6 programs in the original RIS 1, 3 of them are actually within the Heartland. So the expressway making good progress. But 2 I'd like to see a little bit more progress on, quite frankly. I think we'd like to make sure that the A1 East of England, actually we get onto the next stage of that as quickly as possible. And also, when you look at one of the biggest blocks around the London area, in the south of the Heartland area, that southwest quadrant of the M25, anyone who's driven that almost any time, day and night, but even Sunday mornings, dare I say, absolutely chock-a-block, completely congested. I understand the linkage there to the issue of Heathrow, but we really do need to see some progress on that, because post-Brexit, if we're going to see the economic heartland, that Oxford to Cambridge sub-region, really providing the engine that we need for the rest of the economy, it's not just looking inwards, it's a question of looking out globally. It needs that connectivity out to the rest of the world. Heathrow is a key link in that. And then when we're looking at the major roads network, which was, again, the sort of like tease we had from Tricia, I think this is a significant step forward, hopefully. But a lot depends on what it actually means. We all talk about the major roads network. We had some great work from David Quarmby, the Rhys Jeffries report, and so on. But let's go beyond that. What's it actually going to mean when the government start delivering it? How much money, but also how do they define it? Is it really just going to be a few strategic bypasses for a few towns that delivers a housing estate? Is that all the government's going to think of it is? How do we get another few houses built? Oh, let's build a bit of road for it. Or is it actually going to be a real living, vibrant entity that, if you like, is the veins leading into the artery that actually provides the blood circulation of our transport economy and drives the engine of the economy forward? I think it has to be bigger, not narrower. I think it's more than just a few bypasses. It's not just about housing delivery. It's economically powered, or quite frankly, it will not succeed. And we have to look to the future as well, because if you define it today, what it would be today will not be the same as it will be in 5 or 10 years' time, because it will change. As the economy changes, as we start to look at things like AI, autonomous vehicles, and the whole world, the exciting future world, quite frankly, of transport, and where houses then are built and the economy moves to, you have to make sure it's a living entity that moves with that economy. Some roads will be important today and will be declined. And then 5 and 10 years' time, you'll wonder why they were even significant. But roads that are minor today will be really important in 5 and 10 years' time. So let's make sure it's a living document. And what we can hope for is that the Subnational Transport Board will really bring a lot of those concepts together. We can help drive and deliver that on behalf of the DFT. We can provide that linkage between transportation, the economy, and housing as well. So for me, summing up, the secret of success: first of all, long-term commitment. We need to get away from really short-term pockets of money that don't provide that long-term strategic planning that's really essential both for the economy, for housing, and for transport. Strategic cross-boundary planning and programming, not just limited to individual transport authorities, but enabling us to look across those boundaries, permeable boundaries, because everything about transport is permeable, but you need some sort of entity that can actually be accountable for delivery as well. We need to move away from competitive bidding, and I absolutely understand this is controversial with the DFT, but these constant competitive bids, they take so much time, so much resource, they suck the life energy out of local councils. And at the end of the day, there's no guarantee you're going to get anything back for it. And quite frankly, that's exactly in times of scarce resource and scarce money. That's resource that should be focused on delivery, not on spending time producing big, thick bidding documents, in the off chance we might get a few pounds out of it. We need to really focus on getting away from that. Let's have some strategic thinking and strategic allocations. We also need to get away from all these little pockets of money. It's great to get a little bit of this and a little bit of that, some through the left, some to the Transport Authority, some here, some there. Bring it together. Let's consolidate that money. Let's, again, think strategically about the way we're investing in our infrastructure, get away from little pocket handkerchiefs of money here and there. You can look, I think, to the subnational transport boards to actually be managing locally. I think program management at the subnational transport board level feels right to me. Deliver locally, plan and program manage at the sub-regional transport level. And you should be able to hold us to account. This isn't about a get-out-of-jail-free card in terms of just give us loads of money and go away. You need to be able to hold us to account for delivering that program. It's effectively a contract between us. What you want, what we can deliver, give us the money, agree the program. Give us a little bit of flexibility within that program to deliver, but then that contract exists between us. And if we get this right, it's not just, quite frankly, with great respect to most people in this room, about a bit of black tarmac down on some roads. It's actually about the economic success of this country. It's about making sure that in decades to come, this country remains a world-leading economy, that we're driving success globally and internationally, that actually we're providing the houses that we need as a country, and we actually have prosperous communities for all of our people. And if we do that, it's a success not just for the Heartlands area, it's a success for the whole of the UK. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.